Hello, this is Martin Gore from Depeche Mode.
Hi, this is Dave Gahan from Depeche Mode, and you are listening to
My Nerd World.
It's Depeche Mode, the podcast. I'm your host, Jon Justice, and I'm glad that you are with another episode this week. As always, if you want to email me, TalkShowNerd@gmail.com. Be sure to leave a comment on YouTube if you're enjoying the show there. And if you are watching on YouTube, I hope you'll take a moment when you're done or stop the YouTube video and go and follow the podcast on whatever podcast platform you listen to your shows on. I'm limited in what I can do on YouTube due to copyright issues, and this week on the show, I'm adding a new element that will only be available on the podcast, as I cannot put it on the YouTube channel. So when you hear me talking about my science fiction space opera series, which will be short, be sure you stick around till after that to hear the latest addition to the podcast, only for the podcast listeners, not available on YouTube. With that, let's go ahead and get into this week's episode. Now, in the wake of last week's announcement of Depeche Mode M hitting theaters on October 28th, set to screen on over 2,500 cinemas across more than 60 countries, with those tickets going on sale September 17th. The website, of course, DepecheModeM.com. We haven't had any new news since last week, nor any possible news regarding the unreleased tracks from Memento Mori, those 4 tracks that we continue to talk about on the show. Now, In the End, of course, was included in the credits to Memento Mori M, and I've been on the Depeche-Mode.com page, the home forum, and they've got a fantastic thread devoted to Depeche Mode M, and a lot of speculation and intrigue around what we'll get in terms of a physical release. I have no doubt at all that we'll end up getting a physical release of the movie in and of itself. The question really remains of, do we get sort of an audio release to coincide with that? My guess would be yes. I heard rumors from very reliable sources over the course of the past year that there was talk of a live album being released. Now, whether or not we end up getting the entirety of the Mexico shows that were filmed for Depeche Mode M remains to be seen. However, I could see a digital release. You know, we'd like a physical release. I'd love to have a CD. But I could certainly go and see a digital release for Depeche Mode M, sort of as a soundtrack. That could possibly include, at a bare minimum, In the End, that was included in the end credits of the film itself. And if not, maybe perhaps those other 4 unreleased tracks. Also, my thought on this is that the physical release aspect of the film aside, I was told that those 4 tracks from the Memento Mori sessions would be released, and they have been authorized to be released by the band in promotion of the film. My expectation would be that within the next couple of weeks, specifically September 17th, I would hope, and again, a part of me expects, that we'll get the digital release of In the End and maybe one of the tracks from the movie itself, one of the live tracks from the tour and those Mexico shows, released on your platforms, on your music platforms, whether it's Apple, iTunes, Spotify, whatever, to coincide with the ticket sale to offer up some promotion. That makes the most sense for me. And a part of that is just because I'm desperate to get a clean copy of In the End. I absolutely love that song. And if you haven't heard it yet, make sure you go and check out the podcast. I did release one specific podcast that was just the cleanest version of In the End that was recorded at one of the screenings. I had to do some tinkering with the song as it was missing the first few moments of the song. So I sort of recrafted it based off of the end of the track to create an entire track. But I absolutely love that song. I firmly believe that it should have been on Memento Mori. So I'm, again, excited to get a really clean copy of it because the production on it sounds absolutely spectacular. Now, speaking of production, and I've talked about this on previous episodes, but I'll go ahead and remind you here, Marta Salogni, who along with James Ford was in charge of producing Memento Mori and did a fantastic job. She was tasked with mixing Depeche Mode M. And this has, provided, again, quite a bit of speculation among fans that, well, if she mixed the live show for the movie, then she more than likely went and mixed the entirety of the concert. Fernando Frias, the director of Depeche Mode M, has said publicly that he had a difficult time choosing which songs were going to be included in the film and which ones weren't. And if that's the case, then more than likely that means they had the entire concert to work with. So, with a physical release, we could possibly go and get the entirety of the show and not just what's included in Depeche Mode M. Somebody had posted as well, and I wasn't aware of this, that apparently going back to the Delta Machine days and the Delta Machine tour, that there was a debate between both Dave Gahan and Andrew Fletcher. And Dave Gahan preferred just the documentary with the concert footage that Anton Corbijn had created for the Live in Berlin release, or had created around that tour. And Dave Gahan just wanted the documentary with the footage released, and it was Fletch who wanted the totality, the entire concert released. Well, the compromise was they ended up releasing the box set in which we got both versions. The documentary version that, contains the live songs along with interviews that Anton Corbijn did with the fans, and also the entire concert. I still am so incredibly disappointed with the physical release of Live in Berlin because of Anton's insistence to shoot it in low resolution. It's one thing when he shot on film for Devotional. That still looks fantastic. It looks like it was a film, a movie. But since he used the digital cameras but shot it at a lower resolution, whenever I watch it on a big screen, and I've complained about this before, the quality of the picture is just atrocious. Now, but many have mentioned that if you go and download the digital version of the concert for the Delta Machine tour, it is a clean version. That being said, I'd like to have the physical copies. I'm a big fan of physical media. So I really enjoyed that show, more so than the Spirit tour, which is why it's so disappointing that, unfortunately, when I throw it up on my big screen at home, the picture just looks bad. And it's not even like pixelated bad. It's got like there's like lines in it and the way that he shot it. And I remember how well documented it was that Anton Corbijn was just insistent that it was filmed this way. So, all right, enough of my rambling. I want to get to your listener feedback that I didn't get a chance to on last week's episode. And again, you can always email me, talkshownerd@gmail.com. So let's get to some of your thoughts from over the past week. First off, friend of the show, Jason, writes in and says this: I've listened to the BBC radio documentary about Depeche Mode, and it wasn't that bad. I, too, have now listened to it as well, and it was okay. It was about what I had expected. Jason goes on to say, I treated it more of an essay question asked by an American that they tried to answer. Why is Depeche Mode treated as a supergroup all around the world, but not in its home country in the UK? Which is probably a question all DM fans ask, especially us UK fans. In the UK, most of the public probably thinks that they are an 80s band that no longer exists. It's something that really resonated with me, as it is the exact opposite of what's happened here in my hometown of Birmingham and in the UK in general over the last 7 days or so with the passing, mourning, and celebration of Ozzy Osbourne. Even if not a fan of heavy metal, Black Sabbath, or even the music of Ozzy Osbourne, we all loved Ozzy. He was one of us, a working-class lad from a humble background here in Birmingham, who achieved his dream and along the way helped create a whole new genre, new music genre and culture across the world. He was proud of that, and the whole city wanted to celebrate his achievements and life, as well as how he represented the city globally. I doubt the same would happen for DM in this country, although I understand a campaign is underway in Basildon to honor the band. Regard, Jason. Yeah, and we actually talked about that on a couple of episodes back a few weeks ago. So as always, thank you for that, Jason. Let's move on to Xavier Kane, who writes this, talking about a post regarding DM rumors. And Xavier says, nothing that we haven't heard before regarding DM rumors, except the following caught my eye. Martyr was released as a single for the Best of Depeche Mode Volume 1, originally being intended as the lead single for Playing the Angel, and was originally known as Martyr for Love as opposed to Martyr. The lead single was changed to Precious due to fears that Martyr was too poppy compared to the rest of Playing the Angel. Buenos dias. God bless you and your family, Xavier Kane. God bless to you and your family as well. I remember that story from the release of Playing the Angel. I don't think I'd heard the part that it was actually supposed to be a lead single, which makes sense. The commentary that I had heard was that they thought it was such a strong enough track to be a single. That's why they released it as a single. That being said, I love Martyr. I completely disagree that it would have presented sort of a false impression of what Playing the Angel was supposed to be. I certainly would have considered putting that on the album. Unfortunately, I feel like its release as a single didn't really take off because it was attached to the Best of Depeche Mode Volume 1, even though it was an incredibly strong track and a track that I go back and listen to quite often. So what Xavier Kane is driving at here, though, I think speaks further to what I've been talking about in terms of the quality of those 4 unreleased tracks from Memento Mori, and specifically In the End. I can't say enough good things about that song. I absolutely love that track, and as a matter of fact, it's probably my favorite track next to Ghosts Again from Memento Mori. I'm just lumping it into Memento Mori. With Ghosts Again and Don't Say You Love Me being my favorite songs from that album, I would actually put In the End between those two tracks. And there's an argument to be made once I hear the clean version, not the recorded version that I have in my possession, that I may like it more than Ghosts Again. It really just has that Depeche Mode vibe while still being wholly modern. It takes me back, though, to Black Celebration. I love that track, and it has me really, really enthusiastic for those other 3 tracks that we have yet to hear. All right, let's go and hear from Chris Culpepper, friend of the show, talking about Songs of Faith and Devotion being his favorite time period for DM, music, live shows, image, etc. He asks the question, though, am I delusional in my opinion? I don't think he is. A friend of mine recently stated that DM had lost the plot in 93 and 94, made too many changes and never recovered. Listen, your friend is not alone in that take. I got a buddy of mine who I'd grown up with at a young age, relatively speaking, in the time period leading up to Songs of Faith and Devotion, who was as big of a Depeche Mode fan as I was. He actually began to get turned off of Depeche Mode when Violator came out. He said it sounded too house. That being said, he had completely abandoned Depeche Mode by the time Songs of Faith and Devotion had come out. Now, Chris goes on to say, he stated the following case which made me question everything. He says, 1, incorporating live drums into their set. 2, obvious tension and drug use in the band. 3, very extreme change in sound and image. 4, essentially dumping their 80s catalog except for 4 or 5 songs. 5, Songs of Faith and Devotion sold about half of Violator. 6, DM never sold any greater copies of Songs of Faith and Devotion after 93, Ultra, Exciter, Playing the Angel, etc. Obviously, I had my defense that I can share another time. Sorry for being verbose. Thank you, Chris Culpepper. No, you're not being verbose at all. First off, as I always say, it's subjective. You know, views on Depeche Mode and what eras we like more and which albums we think are the best, it really, really is all subjective. Now, that being said, I completely disagree with what he's saying there. I love Depeche Mode and the fact that they challenged me as a young teenager heading into his 20s who fell in love with the band going back to 85. We're now parked in between 90 and 93 era. I'm kind of coming into my own as an adult. Fell in love with Violator like everybody did. Thought it was the best album I'd ever heard in my entire lifetime. At the time, Tour that followed did the same thing, and being completely hyped for what Songs of Faith and Devotion was going to bring, and then being broadsided by this massive change from the band that challenged me and my love for the band, but what ultimately ended up being one of my favorite albums by Depeche Mode, even though it sounds incredibly different. In terms of the musical arrangements, lyrical content remained the same. You know, the band, obviously, as they have admitted themselves and Dave Gahan wanted, they butched up. But I was actually listening to I Feel You on the drive in this morning, and it's not a song that I return to often, but when that song hits, it hits. But it made me appreciate music, and it made me have more of an open mind to not just Depeche Mode, but all forms of music. Wherein, at that time period, I think for a lot of us, we kind of shut out songs that we had grown up with liking, and we became a little bit more exclusive and cliquey in the music that we listened to. I was watching a compilation video last night, and I love going back and watching these little snapshots of time that circle around years in which Depeche Mode had some sort of, a historical significance. So I watched a 1998 video compilation about 8 minutes long of all the number one songs that were released in 1998. Oh, I'm sorry. No, I'm sorry. It was 1987. My bad. It was 1987. That's right. Because it would have been heading into the release of Music for the Masses and then heading into 88 and, of course, the Rose Bowl show. Okay, so it was 1987. And what was really fascinating about watching this compilation of number one songs from January through December was how many of these songs that I was really, really familiar with but were completely out of the genre that I would end up listening to as I got older. My mind was a lot more open at a younger age, right? I wasn't sort of as snobby and pinkies up about the music that I listened to. I subsequently followed that up by watching the compilation video of 1988, the following year. And what's really interesting is a bunch of those number one tracks I was not as familiar with, nor did I like them. And that coincides directly with my Depeche Mode fandom, wherein I was turning almost exclusively to listening to alternative music and had pushed away any other genres of music. I say all this getting back to Songs of Faith and Devotion and how it challenged me in the way that I go interpret art and appreciate art, because later in years, while I kept that same sort of elitist attitude towards the genres of music that I listened to, through Depeche Mode and how they changed with albums and challenged their own music while still, their own musical conventions while still being wholly Depeche Mode, it made me actually go and appreciate, as I got older, those other genres of music that I simply didn't listen to during that time period where I was exclusively listening to alternative music. You kind of come full circle with it. So again, getting back to Chris Culpepper's comments, I'm with him. Songs of Faith and Devotion is one of my favorite time periods. It's the tour that I saw the most Depeche Mode shows live. It's probably one that, again, helped form my opinion of music more so than Violator did, and it made me much more open to not just what Depeche Mode does as a band and how they change from album to album, but what other bands do and the other genres that Depeche Mode pulled from as well. That time period was fantastic. The live show was spectacular, as was everything surrounding that particular era. And I think that translates a bit to Ultra as well, you know, with the band coming out of the difficult time period that they'd had with Alan Wilder leaving, with Dave Gahan attempting to go and overcome his drug addiction. You know, there was sort of this carryover in the fandom of Ultra and an album that most people, including the band, say never really should have existed until they got back on their feet, the singles tour and Exciter and everything that followed afterwards. TalkShowNerd at gmail.com. Leave a comment up on YouTube if you're enjoying the show there. So with that, for those that are watching this on YouTube, thank you so much for checking out the episode. And I want to encourage you that if you enjoy science fiction, movies, or reading, I've written a science fiction series. It's called EMBARK. 7 books in all in my science fiction space opera series set in 2172. You'll follow a group of Earth evacuees as they fight for their own survival and humanity's survival far from the planet of which they're from. It's a sprawling, epic space opera adventure Just go to Amazon.com and search for EMBARK, EMBARK, and Jon, Jon Justice, and you can check out the series. So for those on YouTube, thank you so much for listening. For those podcast listeners, hopefully you got past the ad, I have something very special and an addition to the show that I'll probably be doing on a more consistent basis. I haven't come up with a great name for it yet. At the moment, I'm just calling it Depeche Mode Song Commentary.